part of the individual experience with the gene keys is the contemplative path, which you talk about. It's not
Mm.
the right-hand path, the left-hand path. And I thought that was
Mm.
lovely. If you could give maybe like a quick or not so quick synopsis of that and what contemplation is and why it works with
Yeah,
the
well,
gene keys so well.
yeah, I think it's I'm going to pitch my little book here actually. So while I'm doing it, look, because
Ah,
I've got it here, it's my new book, Art of Contemplation. Look how thin it is.
beautiful.
Isn't that's the kind of book you could give to your partner, you know? Not the big book and Gene Keys, you'll be like, oh my God, what is this stuff? But if you give them that one, that's like, why don't you have a look at this, dear? It's got some really nice. It doesn't mention any Gene Keys. It doesn't mention any jargon, um, and it's got some practical things that you can do in your life. Essentially, contemplation. It's a lovely word. It's an art that you learn over time, and many of us do it already. Um, it requires a kind of, it requires that you build more space into your life, and the first way to do that is to find pauses. So let's say you get up tomorrow morning and you say, right, today I'm going to be alert to pauses. I'm going to go, and my intention is to take more pauses in the day. And so as you start to kind of do that and you're listening, what you'll find is that every now and again, when something happens, you may realize that, oh, this is a pause. I'm in a pause. I can stop. I can give myself a breather here. And what you'll realize is that in every day, there are many, many pauses. But because of the way our mind works and because of the way the modern world works and the pressures that we put ourselves under, we don't take any of those pauses or very few of them. And so we get to the end of the day and we're exhausted and we flop down in front of the TV or on the bed and we're just like, that's it, we're tired. And so there hasn't been very much awareness in that day. If you consider like that every day, more or less, we have, I don't know about puppets, but humans, we have 17,000 breaths a day, or it's different. It's a lot, right?
Absolutely. I don't
I
really
don't know.
breathe in the conventional sense. So
No. So I guess for you, you're kind of like this one breath that just kind of, yeah,
it's a good way to put it. Yeah.
envious of that. And so, yeah, so the more pauses you find, and a pause can be like, a couple of seconds. It's the pause after a sentence, the pause, when you come into the house and you just, and you just say, I'm just going to sit. Instead of rushing to the next thing, you just say, I'm just going to pause. That's why tea is great, because tea is a classic pausing contemplative drink.
Great time for a pause. Yeah.
Yeah. And so the first level of contemplation is about building more pauses into your life. I call it harvesting pauses because they're there all the time. You just have to notice them. And often the pauses are like things we get annoyed by. Like one of my friends, she said, this book has changed my relationship to LA traffic. Because, every time you meet a red light or you're in a traffic jam, like instead of being frustrated, I've got to go, you go, well, the universe has just given me a pause. And so you breathe, or you might kind of, do a little meditation, or you just enjoy the pause. And the more you do that in every day, the more pauses you find, the more awareness of those different breaths, those many breaths you're bringing into your day. So in that sense, it's a bit like mindfulness. But it actually, what you're doing is you're pumping awareness and you're pumping space into your day. And when you do that, everything becomes more efficient. You are more calm. Your decisions and your mind are clearer. You're more in flow with rhythms. You're with kind of universal rhythm, so you don't kind of miss things. You arrive places at the right time. Synchronicity, you engage synchronicity because you're moving majestically instead of manically. So that's that's the first kind of level of contemplation, is to find pauses in your everyday life. And it's really a beautiful thing, and everyone can do it. And if you just do it for a day, even if you forget the whole day, but you've managed to remember one pause, that will be the moment, I guarantee you, at the end of your day, that will be the moment you remember
Hmm.
at the end, because you'll go, oh, that was a nice few minutes I took then, where I just did nothing, or I just gave myself that gap. And actually, it's in those gaps that magic happens. So people often mistake, they think, oh, I haven't got time to take pauses. That's exactly that. The pauses are in the life. They're there already. They're already occurring. You're just not harvesting them.
Hmm.
So by actually bringing more space, you're creating more efficiency. And in a way, it's kind of magical. So that's the first level. Do you reckon you could be into that?
Absolutely. I mean, my life might look fun and easy. It's all laughter, but it's a lot. It just keeps going and going, and I can use a pause, and I can see why that's what I would remember in my day, because it's so distinct from just the mad rush, always
Mm.
thinking and trying to get things accomplished. And I take the train sometimes, and it's difficult to be on there. Like, people are just still not pausing. They're like in their phones, like, whoa. And
Mm.
every now and then I'll do a puppet show for people, and it's so beautiful
Mm.
because it breaks it up. And
Mm.
I don't know if that's essentially a pause because they're watching me, they're still interacting, but it's
Mm.
definitely a pattern disruption. And so I see, like,
Definitely.
yes, some
Yeah, you're
laughter.
giving them a pause,
Hmm.
definitely. And a pause is exactly that. It is a pattern disruptor. It can be many things. Like a good example of a pause is when someone stops you and you're in a hurry and they want to kind of talk to you about, a stranger, let's say, or someone and they engage you and you're like in a hurry, and so you kind of make an excuse and you want to get and you don't want to talk to them. Like, but actually, if you sometimes if you kind of take that in instead of rushing off, you could just go, I'm going to give this person my full attention right now. And actually, what can happen is you have a really rich exchange, and that person then feels listened to in some way, and you feel good, and because they feel good, and then when you do walk on, your day has changed because instead of kind of shutting something off, you've actually opened.
Hmm.
And the second part of contemplation, it's got three parts, is called pivoting. Um, and pivoting is when you could probably give us a pivot.
Does that count? Is that
That's
is a vector
kind of,
maybe?
yeah.
Okay.
It's probably not so easy when you have a hand stuffed up Um, but basically, yeah. So pivot is a 180, um, and it means that in a pivot happens inside a pause. Pivoting is a kind of originally a Buddhist term, I think, and it means that the awareness inside you awakens to a pattern that is unhealthy and then changes that pattern through seeing it. So the pattern changes, and that's pivoting, and it happens on its own. And it can take, a pivot can take like as long as it takes. It might be quick, it might take hours. When you're in one because you kind of feel like uncertain and something's going on and your relationship to something is changing. There's an alchemy going on inside you, and you need to give yourself space. So pivots generally happen within pauses, within pausing, within a day or an hour or a minute where there's awareness, and something changes inside you, something that you may not have otherwise seen. You might have continued doing that pattern for years, but the moment you start creating these pauses, you allow the possibility of pivots, and pivots are like really powerful. They often create a breakthrough because they don't just see the pattern and break it. They kind of change occurs inside it. So they're quite mysterious, and you can't predict them, and you can't make them happen. All you can do is create pauses,
Hmm.
and out of 100 pauses, maybe one or two will be a pivot. There'll be a change that takes place. So that's the second phase, and it tends to also be more, as the contemplation moves deeper. So the beginning of contemplation is kind of mental, and then it starts to move deeper into our emotional life, and particularly starts to affect our relationships, which is where most of the pivoting occurs, because it's in our relationships where most of our bad behavior, or I call it bad behavior, or kind of mad behavior,
Have you been
our
talking to my wife? What's
so, yeah, my wife, my bad behavior.
got it.
But it's in there that the that it occurs. Um, so a lot of that can happen within relationships. A lot of that, those pivoting moments, which can change a negative pattern into a positive one. So in that respect, the art of contemplation is something very profound. So it's not just you're like thinking. Your contemplation is not like you're just taking something and thinking about it. It's a whole way of being. And these are the phases. Pausing is the first technique. Pivoting is then what occurs as the awareness moves deeper inside you. And then the final stage is called merging. And merging is what happens gradually as lots and lots of pivoting happens. So over like more years, merging is when you begin to soften and you begin to open more automatically to life. So when something comes at you that's negative or holds tension, instead of contracting, your habit changes because through the pivoting experience, you start to trust in life more. And so you begin to open to things and you begin to move towards difficulties instead of away from them. And that's called merging, because you start to merge into the field of life and you begin to trust in what life is delivering you, the experiences, the people on a day-to-day basis, that there's a perfection to that. And it's really about trust. So contemplation is a lot more than just, thinking or being deep or anything like that. It's like a whole art that brings us into life in a much deeper way. So it can be applied to so many areas. There's no area it can't be applied. Whatever you do in life, whatever your role is, whatever your job is, whatever your career is, if you employ the art of contemplation, everything will improve.
It's beautiful.
So I've got a bit of a money spinner here.
A money spinner? I don't know
Well,
that. Oh, I see.
It's
The
like
book.
this little book. It could change the world.
I agree 100%.
Because it's very simple, the simplest truths, and you can apply it to everything in life, and it will improve things. If you're a sports person, for example, if you apply the art of contemplation into your sport, then your rhythm will improve, your timing will improve, your focus will improve, because you're improving all those things outside your sport. You're improving them in your life, and that means they're going to come into your sport as well.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same with everything. So if you're improving all those things in your relationships, in your everyday life, it's going to come into your work. It's going to start to go everywhere. And that's how contemplation works. So it's like really powerful practice.
It's one of those, I love it. It's one of those counterintuitive things, like, I don't have time, so I have to take time.
Yes.
I think is that what contemplation means? Like with time, like
Yeah.
I think that's probably.
Yes. Do you speak Latin?
I'm a linguist. I kind of pick up things here and there.
Yes, it does. Templum is temple, and con generally means to go in. So it means to go into one's temple, inside. And the temple, of course, is your inner world, and it means to remind yourself to go into your inner world and breathe some of the riches of that world, back out into the outer world.
I love how it's laid out, like the pivoting and then in the merging. And the merging piece reminds me, you told a story on the audio in the first Gene Key about Lao Tzu, and the old master sends the young apprentice to Lao Tzu and to see if kind of he's got what it takes, if he's close to, I guess, enlightenment. And they live together in silence, and then one day they go to see the sunrise, and the young man says one word, it's a gorgeous sunrise, and says beautiful. And I didn't understand this when you shared the story. It's like, why would that be a problem? Lao Tzu goes back and they live together in silence, and then he tells the old master, rather a noisy fellow. I'm like, well, he said only one word. But I think so. But I did try to force it. I'm like, okay, I know there's some wisdom here. I'm just going to sit with it. And it actually
Mm.
took quite a few months. And then I realized, he couldn't merge with the moment.
Mm.
It was maybe too much for the young man. He had to do something. So he said just one word, but that's all it takes. It takes you out of
Mm.
the moment. You can't simultaneously be with the beauty and say beautiful.
Mm.
And we think that's maybe silly. Like, who doesn't say beautiful? Oh, look how beautiful. But that, that's one thing. I mean, some of us can't even take like too much praise or too much of a beautiful sunrise, let alone too much fear or anger or sadness. And I feel like that's a lot of what the Gene Keys has helped with, like just to be present to those things as well, to merge
Mm.
with. I'm not saying I can do it yet, merging with my fear, but yeah,
Yeah,
that was.
absolutely.
Yeah.
That was very wise.
Oh,
Yeah.
thanks. See,
Yeah.
puppetry. I'm telling you, it's got something
Puppetry
there.
is where it's at. Yeah, no, I get it. I'm converting.
Oh, thank you.
I, I'm pivoting. Pivot the puppet.
Let me see if I can. Whoa, there it is. Got it.
Exactly.
Uh,
Yeah.
I, you know, I love that you're a poet. Also, like you speak so poetically. I've never read anything you've written. You reference a lot of poets. Rilke and other, and I think that's such a great, perfect part of the spiritual teaching. Like poets give you just enough,
Mm.
and then you have to add. You have to sit with it for a bit and kind of internalize it and add yourself to the piece. I feel. Where does your love of poetry stem from?
Being lazy.
Fewer words.
Well, when I was at university studying English literature, I I realized that you had to there was a lot less work when you studied poetry instead of novels.
Ostensibly.
Yes. And so I cottoned onto this, and that's obviously partially true. But I also love the economy, yes, of poetry, and um, it's not even poetry; it's the poetic. You know, the poetic. Life is poetic. Because I don't think poetry is about poems. You can be I know many very poetic people, and they've never written a poem in their life. It's about living poetically, and you can do that, and that is to live contemplatively. To live contemplatively is to live poetically. It means that you notice things, and you take time with people, and you maybe engage in a richer, more profound way with what's in front of you. And if that does come up into words, that's wonderful. But it might also come up into art, or it might come up into your relating skills, and it might come into the job that you do, whatever it is, might come into your hands in all kinds of ways. It probably comes into the hand that's inside you right now. Um,
Oh, stop.
Is there one? Oh, stop it.
There's
Exactly.
one down there, yes.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's about living poetically. Um, I also happen to love words, so for me, it is literal as well. I love poetic writings, and I think poetry has a lot of a deep connection with spirituality for the reason I said earlier, because the true higher states of consciousness are silence, and they're beyond words. So truth and those experiences of like the pure light that I experienced when others have maybe had flashes of and revelations. It's from silence, because there's no words in those states, and poetry just dances along the banks of that of the void. It plays with you, and kind of takes you just to the edge, and it weaves paradox. I love paradox.
Mhm.
And you said, counterintuitive. It is counterintuitive as well. It has nothing to do with science and the left brain. It's completely holistic. It's a right brain phenomenon, poetry, in that sense, or it's a left right, because it can play with logic, but I guess, like the gene keys, it plays with logical patterns, but it's kind of naughty. It can break the rules. It can bend the rules. It can, I like to bend and break rules.
Who doesn't, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So that's beautiful. I feel like that's a good place to leave it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Richard. This has been an absolute pleasure, and I look forward to the next time that we speak.
Likewise, little Ginger. And let's get together and have a cup of little tea sometime. That would be wonderful.
Lovely.